Sarah Martinez rushed through the marble lobby of Sterling Industries, her coffee-stained blouse clinging uncomfortably to her skin. She was already 20 minutes late for the monthly team meeting, and her supervisor had made it clear that punctuality was not optional. The elevator seemed to take forever as she watched the numbers climb to the 15th floor, her heart racing with anxiety about what excuse she could possibly give this time. The meeting room was packed when she finally slipped in through the back door. Her colleagues barely glanced up as she found an empty chair in the corner, grateful that the presentation had already begun. On the large screen at the front of the room, charts and graphs displayed the company's quarterly performance, while their department head droned on about efficiency improvements and cost-cutting measures. Sarah tried to focus on the presentation, but her mind kept wandering to the stack of unpaid bills sitting on her kitchen table. Despite working at one of the city's most successful tech companies for 3 years, she was still struggling to make ends meet. The salary they paid her barely covered rent in this expensive city, let alone the student loans that seemed to grow larger each month despite her regular payments. As the presentation continued, she learned that Sterling Industries had posted record profits for the third consecutive quarter. The CEO, Marcus Sterling, had apparently received a bonus that was more than Sarah would earn in 10 years. Meanwhile, the company had frozen all employee raises and cut benefits, claiming they needed to maintain competitive profit margins for shareholders. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Marcus Sterling purchased his third vacation home and upgraded his yacht, Sarah had been eating instant noodles for dinner most nights. She worked 50-hour weeks, often staying late to meet impossible deadlines, only to watch the company's leadership celebrate their success at exclusive restaurants she could never afford. When the meeting finally ended, Sarah gathered her things and headed toward the restrooms. She needed a moment to compose herself before returning to her desk and the mountain of work waiting for her. The bathroom was empty when she entered, and she locked herself in one of the stalls, finally, allowing herself to breathe. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate asking about rent money. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the frustration that had been building for months finally overflow. She called her best friend Lisa, needing someone to vent to about the impossible situation she found herself in. "I can't take this anymore," Sarah said as soon as Lisa answered. "I'm working myself to death for this company. And, for what? So Marcus Sterling can buy another sports car while I'm choosing between groceries and gas money. That bad today?" Lisa asked sympathetically. "Worse. They just announced record profits, but apparently there's no money for employee raises. Meanwhile, our beloved CEO just got a bonus that could fund a small country. I swear, I hate that man so much. He's completely out of touch with reality, sitting in his ivory tower while the rest of us struggle to survive." Sarah's voice grew louder as her anger intensified. "Do you know what he said in last month's company newsletter? That we're all a family and that our dedication and loyalty are what makes Sterling Industries successful. Family? If we were family, maybe he'd care that half his employees are living paycheck to paycheck while he's living like a king." "You need to calm down," Lisa said gently. "I know you're frustrated, but getting this worked up isn't helping anything. I just can't believe how selfish and greedy some people can be," Sarah continued, her voice echoing off the bathroom walls. "Marcus Sterling has more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, but he still needs to squeeze every penny out of his workers. I bet he's never worked a real day in his life. Probably got handed everything on a silver platter and thinks he's some kind of business genius." What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus Sterling had arrived early for a meeting with the building's facilities manager about renovating the executive offices. He had taken a wrong turn while looking for the facilities office and found himself in the employee bathroom area. As he approached the men's room, he couldn't help but overhear the conversation coming from the women's restroom next door. Marcus paused, initially intending to simply continue on his way. However, hearing his name mentioned stopped him in his tracks. He found himself standing frozen in the hallway, listening to every word of Sarah's passionate tirade about his character, his wealth, and his leadership style. "The worst part," Sarah continued, unaware of her audience, "is that he probably thinks he's doing us all a favor by employing us. Like we should be grateful to work for poverty wages while he profits from our labor. I've been here 3 years, and my salary has increased exactly once, by 2%. Meanwhile, the cost of everything keeps going up, and I'm falling further behind every month. Marcus felt an uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach as he listened. He had always prided himself on being a fair and generous employer. The company provided competitive salaries and benefits, or at least he thought they did. He began to question whether he truly understood what his employees were experiencing. And don't even get me started on how he treats people in meetings, Sarah went on. He acts like he's so much smarter than everyone else, like our ideas and suggestions are just cute little distractions from his grand vision. I've seen him dismiss brilliant proposals just because they didn't come from someone at his level. Lisa tried to interject, but Sarah was on a roll. You know what really gets me? He gave this big speech last year about corporate responsibility and giving back to the community. Meanwhile, he's paying his employees so little that some of them qualify for government assistance. How's that for corporate responsibility? Marcus felt his face growing hot with embarrassment and something else he couldn't quite identify. Was it guilt? Shame? He had never considered that his employees might be struggling financially. The financial reports he reviewed showed healthy profit margins and controlled labor costs, but he had never translated those numbers into the reality of individual employee experiences. I just wish, Sarah said with a sigh, that people like Marcus Sterling could spend 1 week living on what they pay us. Maybe then, they'd understand what it's like to stress about every purchase, to skip meals to save money, to lie awake at night worrying about bills. But, no, he's probably at some fancy restaurant right now, ordering wine that costs more than I make in a week. The bathroom fell silent for a moment, and Marcus realized that Sarah's phone call had ended. He stood there in the hallway, his mind racing with everything he had just heard. This wasn't just one disgruntled employee complaining, he realized. Sarah's frustration seemed to stem from genuine financial hardship and a perception that he was completely disconnected from his workforce. For the first time in years, Marcus began to question whether the success he had built had come at too high a cost for others. He thought about the lifestyle he enjoyed, the expensive trips and luxury purchases that had become routine. He had worked hard to build Sterling Industries, but had he forgotten about the people who worked just as hard to make his vision a reality? As he heard the bathroom door open and footsteps heading down the hallway, Marcus remained frozen in place. He caught a glimpse of a young woman with dark hair and a coffee-stained blouse walking quickly toward the elevators. He assumed this must be Sarah, though he didn't recognize her immediately. Sterling Industries employed over 300 people, and he had to admit that he didn't know most of them personally. The rest of his day was consumed with thoughts about what he had overheard. During his meeting with the facilities manager, he found himself distracted, unable to focus on carpet samples and paint colors. The lunch with potential investors felt hollow as he sat in an expensive restaurant, remembering Sarah's comment about wine that cost more than her weekly salary. That evening, Marcus sat in his spacious home office, looking out at the city lights below. For the first time in years, the view didn't fill him with satisfaction and pride. Instead, he wondered how many of those lights belonged to his employees, and whether they were struggling to pay their electric bills. Marcus Sterling arrived at his office earlier than usual the next morning, his mind still churning from the previous day's revelation. The executive floor was quiet, with most of the senior staff not due to arrive for another hour. He sat at his desk, surrounded by the expensive artwork and luxury furnishings that had once made him feel proud of his accomplishments, but now seemed to mock him with their excess. His first call was to Janet Brooks, the head of human resources. Janet had been with Sterling Industries for over a decade and had always impressed him with her professionalism and attention to detail. If anyone would have insights into employee satisfaction and compensation issues, it would be her. Janet, I need you to prepare a comprehensive report on our current employee compensation structure, Marcus said when she answered. I want to see salary ranges by department, length of service increases, and a comparison with current market rates for our industry. Of course, Mr. Sterling. Is there a particular time frame you need this by? And may I ask what's prompted this request? Marcus hesitated. He couldn't very well explain that he had overheard an employee venting about him in a bathroom. I'm conducting a strategic review of our human resources practices. I want to ensure we're remaining competitive in attracting and retaining talent. I'll have something preliminary for you by this afternoon, Janet promised. Should I include data on employee turnover rates and exit interview feedback as well? Yes, that would be very helpful. And, Janet, I also need you to pull the personnel file for an employee named Sarah Martinez. I believe she works in one of our project management departments. After ending the call, Marcus decided to take an unprecedented step. Instead of remaining in his executive suite, he would spend the day walking through the various departments, observing how employees worked and interacted. He had always prided himself on having an open-door policy, but he realized that very few employees ever took advantage of it. His first stop was the marketing department on the 12th floor. As he walked through the open office space, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. Several employees were eating what appeared to be homemade lunches at their desks, while others seemed to skip lunch altogether. The office furniture was outdated, and some of the computers looked like they hadn't been upgraded in years. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus said as he approached a cluster of workstations. The employees looked up in surprise, clearly not accustomed to visits from the CEO. "Mr. Sterling," said a young man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. "What brings you to our floor?" "I like to check in with different departments from time to time," Marcus replied, though he knew this was the first time he had done such a thing in years. "How are things going with the Morrison campaign?" As the employees briefed him on their current projects, Marcus found himself really listening to them for the first time. They spoke enthusiastically about their work, but he could see the strain in their faces. Dark circles under eyes suggested long hours and possible stress. Several mentioned working weekends and late nights to meet deadlines. "We've been putting in extra hours to ensure the campaign launches on schedule," explained a woman named Rebecca. "It's challenging with our current staffing levels, but we're committed to delivering quality work." Marcus made mental notes about staffing levels and workload distribution. It seemed that his emphasis on efficiency and cost control had resulted in departments being consistently understaffed, forcing existing employees to work excessive hours just to keep up with basic responsibilities. His next stop was the accounting department, where he found a similar situation. The staff appeared dedicated but overwhelmed. When he asked about their workload, the department supervisor, Tom Chen, was diplomatic but honest. "We've been managing well," Tom said carefully, though the freeze on new hires has meant we're all wearing multiple hats. During quarter-end closing, it's not unusual for people to work 12-hour days for weeks at a time. Marcus felt another wave of discomfort. While he had been congratulating himself on maintaining low overhead costs, his employees had been sacrificing their personal time and well-being to compensate for inadequate staffing. In the early afternoon, Janet Brooks arrived at his office with a thick folder of reports. Her expression was professional but serious as she laid out the documents on his conference table. "I've compiled the information you requested," she began. "I think you'll find some of the data quite revealing." The numbers were even worse than Marcus had expected. While Sterling Industries' salaries were technically within industry ranges, they were consistently at the bottom tier. More troubling was the data on salary increases over the past 5 years. Most employees had received raises that barely kept pace with inflation, and many had gone multiple years with no increases at all. "What about cost of living adjustments?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We haven't implemented systematic cost of living adjustments since 2019, Janet replied. The executive team decided to focus on performance-based increases instead, but with budget constraints, very few of those were approved. Marcus studied the turnover data and found another concerning pattern. The company was losing good employees at an alarming rate, particularly those with 3 to 7 years of experience. Exit interview feedback consistently mentioned compensation concerns and limited advancement opportunities. "Tell me about Sarah Martinez," he said, opening her personnel file. Janet flipped through several pages. Sarah has been with us for 3 years, working in project management. She started at $38,000 annually and is currently earning $41,000 after 2 minimal increases. Her performance reviews are consistently excellent, and she's received praise from multiple supervisors for her reliability and work quality. Marcus did some quick mental calculations. Sarah's salary was barely enough to live on in their expensive city, especially considering student loan payments and other typical expenses for someone her age. Meanwhile, he had spent more than her annual salary on a single piece of art for his office last year. Has she ever applied for promotions or requested salary reviews? He asked. She's applied for 3 different positions over the past 18 months, all of which went to external candidates. She did request a salary review last year, but it was denied due to budget constraints. The picture that emerged was of a talented, dedicated employee who was being systematically undervalued and overlooked. Marcus began to understand why Sarah felt so frustrated and why her comments in the bathroom had been so bitter. That evening, Marcus made an unusual decision. Instead of having his driver take him directly home to his gated community, he asked to be driven through some of the neighborhoods where his employees likely lived. He wanted to see firsthand what kind of living conditions his salary structure supported. The apartments and small houses he saw were modest but well-maintained. He stopped at a grocery store in one of these neighborhoods and walked through the aisles, noting the prices of basic items. A week's worth of groceries for one person could easily cost $100 or more. For someone earning Sarah's salary, that represented a significant portion of their income. At the gas station next door, he watched people carefully counting cash before filling their tanks, choosing to pump only small amounts rather than filling up completely. These were the realities his employees faced every day, realities he had never had to consider. Back home that night, Marcus sat in his study with a calculator and a legal pad, working through budgets based on his employees' salaries. After accounting for taxes, rent, utilities, food, transportation, and basic necessities, there was virtually nothing left for emergencies, savings, or any kind of discretionary spending. One unexpected expense, like a car repair or medical bill, could be financially devastating. He thought about his own spending habits and felt a deep sense of shame. His monthly wine budget was more than some of his employees earned in a month. The tip he left at expensive restaurants often exceeded their daily wages. While they were making difficult choices between necessities, he was living in luxury without a second thought. Marcus began drafting notes for what would need to be a comprehensive overhaul of the company's compensation structure. However, he knew that simply increasing salaries wouldn't be enough to address the fundamental disconnect between management and employees that Sarah's comments had revealed. He also realized that he needed to understand the full scope of the problem before implementing any solutions. How many other employees shared Sarah's frustrations? What other issues had he been blind to in his focus on financial performance? How had he become so isolated from the people who made his company successful? The next morning, Marcus scheduled individual meetings with several department heads, asking them to be completely honest about employee morale and working conditions. What he learned was deeply troubling. Multiple supervisors mentioned concerns about employee stress levels, turnover rates, and difficulty recruiting quality candidates due to compensation limitations. I've had several excellent team members leave for positions that offer 20 to 30% salary increases, explained Maria Gonzalez, who headed the software development team. It's becoming increasingly difficult to justify staying here when other companies offer significantly better compensation packages. Marcus also learned that many employees were taking on second jobs or side work to make ends meet. Some were working evenings and weekends for other companies, while others were driving for ride-sharing services or delivering food. The realization that his full-time employees needed additional work just to survive was particularly jarring. During these conversations, Marcus began to see patterns. Marcus Sterling spent the weekend in his home office, surrounded by financial reports, employee surveys, and legal pads covered with calculations and notes. He had cancelled his usual Saturday golf game and Sunday brunch with fellow executives, much to the surprise of his assistant who had been handling his social calendar for years. For the first time in recent memory, Marcus felt that his personal activities seemed trivial compared to the work that needed to be done. The scope of changes required was overwhelming. Simply bringing all employee salaries up to market competitive levels would cost the company millions of dollars annually. However, as Marcus worked through the numbers, he realized that Sterling Industries could easily afford these increases. The company's profit margins were so healthy that even substantial salary improvements would still leave them highly profitable. What troubled him more was the cultural transformation that would be necessary. Employee surveys and exit interviews revealed a pervasive sense that management viewed workers as expenses to be minimized rather than assets to be valued. This attitude had apparently filtered down through multiple levels of leadership, creating an environment where employees felt appreciated only when they were exceeding expectations while accepting substandard compensation. On Monday morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The conference room filled with puzzled faces as the senior leadership of Sterling Industries gathered around the mahogany table. These were people Marcus had worked with for years, individuals he respected and trusted to run various aspects of the business. "I've been conducting a comprehensive review of our human resources practices," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. "What I've discovered is that we have a significant problem with employee compensation and workplace culture that requires immediate attention." He distributed copies of the salary analysis Janet had prepared, along with industry comparisons and cost of living data. As his executives reviewed the materials, Marcus watched their expressions change from confusion to concern. "These numbers show that we're consistently paying below market rates," said CFO David Park, stating what everyone in the room was beginning to realize. "But our profit margins have been excellent. Haven't we been operating efficiently?" "That's exactly the problem," Marcus replied. "We've been so focused on efficiency and cost control that we've forgotten about the people who make our success possible. We're asking employees to work at below market wages while we celebrate record profits. That's not sustainable, and it's not ethical." Victoria Chen, the head of operations, raised her hand tentatively. "Are you suggesting we implement across-the-board salary increases? The impact on our quarterly earnings would be substantial." Marcus had anticipated this reaction. His executive team had been trained to think in terms of quarterly performance and cost optimization. They had been rewarded for finding ways to minimize expenses, including labor costs. "I'm suggesting that we fundamentally rethink how we value our employees," Marcus said firmly. "Yes, it will impact short-term profits, but consider the long-term costs we're already facing. High turnover rates, difficulty recruiting talented candidates, low morale affecting productivity, and reputation that's making it harder to compete for the best people in our industry." He pulled out another set of documents, these focusing on the hidden costs of their current approach. The expense of constantly recruiting and training new employees was substantial. The loss of institutional knowledge when experienced workers left for better opportunities was incalculable. The reduced productivity that came from overworked, stressed employees was eating into their efficiency gains. "I want to propose a comprehensive compensation reform program," Marcus continued. "This will include immediate salary adjustments to bring everyone up to market competitive levels, implementation of regular cost of living adjustments, improved benefits packages, and a clearer path for advancement and recognition." The room fell silent as the executives processed this information. Marcus could see them doing mental calculations, trying to figure out how such changes would affect their own performance metrics and bonuses. "What's the timeline for something like this?" asked Janet Brooks, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting. "I want to implement the first phase within the next 60 days, Marcus replied. "We'll start with salary adjustments and then roll out the other improvements over the following 6 months. David Park looked uncomfortable as he spoke up. "Marcus, I need to point out that this kind of expenditure will significantly impact our profit projections. The board and our investors expect certain performance levels. They are not going to understand why we're voluntarily increasing our labor costs when our current model is generating strong returns." This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. He knew that his proposed changes would be met with resistance, not just from his own team but from the board of directors and company investors who had grown accustomed to Sterling Industries' impressive profit margins. "Then, we need to have a serious conversation about what kind of company we want to be," Marcus said slowly. Are we a business that exists solely to generate maximum profits for shareholders, or are we a company that believes sustainable success comes from valuing and investing in our people? He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. I've spent years building this company, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But I've recently realized that our success has come at the expense of the people who made it possible. That's not the legacy I want to leave. Victoria Chen spoke up hesitantly. What about employee input on these changes? Shouldn't we survey the workforce to understand what improvements they would value most? Marcus nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of thinking he wanted to encourage. Absolutely. I want us to implement anonymous feedback systems so employees can share their concerns and suggestions without fear of retaliation. But we also need to be prepared to act on what we learn, even if it means significant changes to how we operate. The meeting continued for another 2 hours as the team worked through the logistics of implementing such comprehensive changes. They discussed everything from budget reallocation to communication strategies to legal considerations. By the end, Marcus had assigned specific responsibilities to each executive and established a timeline for the various phases of the reform program. That afternoon, Marcus made another unprecedented decision. He scheduled a series of lunch meetings with employees from different departments, selected randomly from the company directory. He wanted to hear directly from the workforce about their experiences and concerns, without the filter of management interpretation. His first lunch was with 3 employees from the customer service department. Marcus chose a casual restaurant near the office, somewhere that wouldn't intimidate his guests or suggest extravagance. As they sat down with their meals, he could see that all 3 women were nervous about dining with the CEO. I want you to know that this conversation is completely off the record, Marcus began. I'm trying to get a better understanding of what it's really like to work at Sterling Industries, and I need your honest feedback. Slowly, the employees began to open up. They talked about the stress of handling difficult customers with inadequate support systems. They described the frustration of seeing problems that could be easily solved but never having their suggestions taken seriously by management. Most importantly, they talked about the financial pressure they faced and how it affected their work and personal lives. I love working here, said Amanda, a customer service representative who had been with the company for 4 years. The work is meaningful, and I believe in our products. But it's gotten really hard to make ends meet. I'm sharing an apartment with 2 roommates, and I still have to work weekends at a retail job just to cover my basic expenses. Marcus found himself taking detailed notes, not just about specific issues but about the emotional impact of their current situation on dedicated employees. These were people who wanted to succeed and contribute to the company's success, but they were being held back by circumstances beyond their control. His second lunch was with employees from the IT department, and the conversation revealed different but equally concerning issues. These workers were dealing with outdated equipment and software, making their jobs more difficult and less efficient. They also talked about being understaffed and overworked, with one person describing how he had been doing the work of 2 people since his colleague left 6 months earlier. We keep being told that budget constraints prevent upgrading our systems, explained James, a network administrator. But, meanwhile, we're expected to maintain the same level of performance with tools that are 3 years behind industry standards. It's frustrating because we know we could be so much more productive with proper resources. Over the course of several days, Marcus conducted similar conversations with employees from every department. The pattern that emerged was consistent: dedicated, talented people who were being held back by inadequate compensation, resources, and recognition. Many expressed genuine affection for the company and pride in their work, but also frustration with what they perceived as management's indifference to their struggles. Perhaps most revealing were the comments about company culture. Multiple employees mentioned feeling disconnected from leadership and uncertain about the company's direction. They described a workplace where hard work was expected but rarely acknowledged, where good ideas were ignored, and where advancement seemed impossible regardless of performance. It feels like there are 2 different companies, said Robert, a marketing specialist. There's the company we work for every day, where we're trying our best with limited resources, and then there's the company that gets talked about in executive meetings and annual reports. Sometimes it's hard to believe we're talking about the same place. These conversations reinforced Marcus's conviction that comprehensive change was necessary. However, they also revealed the depth of cynicism that had developed among the workforce. Many employees had given up hope that conditions would improve, accepting their situation as unchangeable. That evening, Marcus called Sarah Martinez directly. He had gotten her number from the employee directory, and he wanted to speak with her privately before implementing any company-wide changes. The conversation was awkward at first, with Sarah clearly confused about why the CEO was calling her personally. "Sarah, I want to discuss your role at Sterling Industries." The boardroom at Sterling Industries had never felt more tense as Marcus prepared to present his compensation reform proposal to the board of directors. Around the polished table sat 12 influential business leaders, including major investors and industry veterans who had supported the company's growth over the past decade. These were people accustomed to consistent profit growth and impressive returns on their investments. Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that his proposal would challenge everything the board had come to expect from Sterling Industries. He had compiled comprehensive data, financial projections, and competitive analyses to support his arguments, but he knew that facts alone wouldn't be enough to convince shareholders to voluntarily reduce their profits. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, standing at the head of the table with his presentation materials arranged carefully before him. "I'm here today to discuss a strategic initiative that I believe is essential for the long-term success and sustainability of Sterling Industries." He clicked to his first slide, which showed the company's financial performance over the past 5 years. Profits had grown consistently, with particularly strong margins in the last 3 years. The board members nodded approvingly, clearly expecting a celebration of their success. "Our financial performance has been excellent," Marcus continued, "but I've discovered that this success has created some significant challenges that threaten our future competitiveness." The next slide showed employee turnover rates, exit interview feedback, and recruitment difficulties. Marcus watched as expressions around the table shifted from satisfaction to concern as the data revealed the hidden costs of their profitable operations. "We're losing talented employees at an unsustainable rate," Marcus explained. "More importantly, we're developing a reputation in the industry as a company that undervalues its workforce. This is making it increasingly difficult to attract the caliber of employees we need to maintain our competitive advantage." Board member Patricia Williams, a seasoned executive from the financial sector, raised her hand. "Marcus, these are certainly concerning trends, but many companies face similar challenges. What specific solution are you proposing?" Marcus took a deep breath before revealing the heart of his presentation. "I'm proposing a comprehensive compensation reform program that will bring all employee salaries up to market competitive levels, implement regular cost of living adjustments, and improve our benefits package significantly." The room erupted in surprised murmurs as board members quickly reviewed the financial impact projections Marcus had provided. The numbers were substantial, showing a reduction in profit margins that would directly affect shareholder returns. "This is a very significant expense," said Board Chairman Robert Chang, studying the documents carefully. "Have you considered less costly alternatives, such as improving working conditions or offering non-monetary benefits?" Marcus had anticipated this question and had prepared thoroughly for it. "We've analyzed various alternatives, but the fundamental issue is that our employees are struggling financially. No amount of workplace improvements can compensate for wages that don't allow people to meet their basic living expenses." He shared some of the stories he had heard during his employee interviews, carefully protecting individual privacy while illustrating the real-world impact of current salary levels. He talked about talented employees working second jobs, choosing between groceries and gas money, and leaving the company for better opportunities despite their loyalty to Sterling Industries. Board member Daniel Rodriguez, who represented one of the company's largest institutional investors, looked skeptical. "Marcus, I appreciate your concern for employee welfare, but our primary responsibility is to our shareholders. These changes would significantly impact returns, especially in the short term." This was the moment Marcus had been preparing for most carefully. He stood up and walked to the window, gathering his thoughts before delivering what he knew would be the most important speech of his business career. "You're absolutely right that we have a responsibility to our shareholders," Marcus said, turning back to face the board. "But I believe that responsibility extends beyond maximizing short-term profits. We have an obligation to build a sustainable business that can continue generating returns for decades to come." He returned to his presentation, showing data on companies that had implemented similar compensation reforms. The research revealed that while such changes initially reduced profit margins, they typically led to improved productivity, reduced turnover costs, better customer satisfaction, and stronger long-term financial performance. Companies that invest in their workforce see measurable improvements in innovation, efficiency, and market competitiveness, Marcus explained. "We're not just spending money on salaries, we're investing in the foundation of our future success." The discussion continued for over 3 hours, with board members raising concerns about investor relations, competitive positioning, and implementation logistics. Marcus addressed each concern methodically, drawing on the extensive research and planning his team had conducted over the previous weeks. Patricia Williams asked about the timeline for seeing returns on this investment. Marcus presented data showing that companies typically saw productivity improvements within 6 months of implementing comprehensive compensation reforms, with more substantial benefits emerging over 1 to 2 years. "What about our competitors?" asked another board member. "If we increase our labor costs while they maintain lower overhead, won't that put us at a disadvantage?" Marcus had researched this question extensively and had discovered that several of Sterling Industries' main competitors were already paying higher salaries and offering better benefits. "Actually, we're behind the curve in our industry," he explained. "Our current compensation structure is making it difficult to compete for talent, which is ultimately hurting our ability to deliver superior products and services." The most challenging part of the discussion came when Robert Chang asked about alternatives to the full compensation package Marcus was proposing. Could we implement these changes gradually over several years to minimize the financial impact? Marcus had considered this approach but had concluded that gradual implementation would be insufficient to address the urgency of the situation. "The problem with a slow rollout is that we continue losing good employees while we're making incremental improvements," he explained. "We need to send a clear message that Sterling Industries values its workforce and is committed to being a great place to work." After extensive discussion and debate, the board agreed to approve a modified version of Marcus's proposal. They would implement immediate salary adjustments for the lowest paid employees, followed by systematic improvements over 18 months rather than the 6 months Marcus had originally proposed. While not everything he had hoped for, it represented a significant victory and a substantial commitment to change. The next challenge was communicating these changes to the workforce in a way that would rebuild trust and confidence in company leadership. Marcus worked with his communications team to develop a comprehensive rollout plan that included all-hands meetings, departmental discussions, and individual conversations with key employees. The company-wide announcement was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, with all employees gathering in the main auditorium. Marcus had never felt more nervous before a presentation, knowing that his credibility and the future culture of Sterling Industries depended on how this message was received. "Over the past month, I've been conducting a comprehensive review of our company's compensation and workplace practices," Marcus began, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "What I've discovered is that Sterling Industries has not been living up to our values when it comes to supporting and valuing our employees." He could see surprise and skepticism in many faces as he continued. "Effective immediately, we're implementing a series of changes designed to ensure that every employee receives fair compensation for their contributions to our success." The announcement included immediate salary adjustments for employees earning below market rates, with the largest increases going to those who had been most underpaid. Marcus also revealed plans for quarterly performance reviews with meaningful advancement opportunities, improved healthcare benefits, and the establishment of an employee advisory committee to provide ongoing feedback to management. The reaction was mixed, with some employees appearing genuinely excited while others seemed cautious about believing that meaningful change was actually coming. Marcus had expected this skepticism and had prepared specific examples of the improvements that would be implemented immediately. Sarah Martinez was among the employees who received the largest salary adjustments, with her compensation increasing by nearly 30% to bring it in line with market rates for her experience and performance. When Marcus met with her individually to discuss the changes, he could see the emotional impact of finally feeling valued by her employer. "I want you to know that these changes are just the beginning," Marcus told Sarah during their private meeting. "I'm also creating a new position for an employee experience manager, and I'd like you to consider applying for it. Your insights into what employees are experiencing have been invaluable, and I think you could help us continue improving." The weeks following the announcement were intense as the company worked to implement the various changes. HR was overwhelmed with processing salary adjustments, benefits modifications, and new policy implementations. Department heads met regularly with their teams to address concerns and gather feedback about the evolving workplace culture. Marcus made a point of maintaining high visibility throughout the implementation process, regularly visiting different departments and meeting with employees at all levels. He wanted to demonstrate that the changes represented a genuine shift in leadership philosophy, not just a temporary response to workforce issues. One of the most challenging aspects of the implementation was managing the reaction from investors and industry analysts. Sterling Industries' quarterly earnings report showed the expected reduction in profit margins, leading to questions and criticism from some financial experts who viewed the compensation increases as unnecessary expenses. Marcus found himself defending the company's new direction in multiple investor calls and industry meetings. He consistently emphasized the long-term benefits of investing in workforce development and the competitive advantages that would emerge from having a more satisfied and productive employee base. 18 months after the bathroom incident that had changed everything, Marcus Sterling walked through the halls of his company with a sense of satisfaction he had never experienced before. The transformation of Sterling Industries had exceeded even his most optimistic expectations, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond simple compensation improvements. The most immediate and measurable changes had been in employee retention and recruitment. The company's turnover rate had dropped from 32% to just 8%, while the quality of job applicants had improved dramatically. Sterling Industries was now recognized as one of the top employers in their industry, with young professionals actively seeking opportunities to join the company. Sarah Martinez had indeed accepted the position of Employee Experience Manager, and her work in that role had been transformational. She had implemented regular feedback systems, mentorship programs, and professional development initiatives that had fundamentally changed how employees viewed their career prospects at Sterling Industries. Her first-hand understanding of employee struggles had made her incredibly effective at identifying and addressing workplace issues before they became serious problems. The quarterly employee satisfaction scores just came in, Sarah reported during her monthly meeting with Marcus. "We're at 87% overall satisfaction, up from 41% when we started this process. More importantly, employee engagement scores have increased by over 60%. Marcus reviewed the detailed feedback Sarah had compiled from across all departments. The comments painted a picture of a workplace where people felt valued, supported, and optimistic about their futures. Employees frequently mentioned feeling heard by management, having clear advancement paths, and being proud to work for Sterling Industries. The financial results had been equally impressive, though in ways that had surprised even Marcus. While profit margins had initially decreased due to higher labor costs, overall profitability had actually increased as productivity improvements and reduced turnover costs more than compensated for the additional salary expenses. "Our revenue per employee has increased by 23% since we implemented the compensation reforms," CFO David Park reported during the executive team meeting. The combination of reduced recruitment costs, lower training expenses, and improved productivity has created a significant net positive financial impact. The company had also seen unexpected benefits in customer satisfaction and business development. Employees who felt valued and secure in their positions were providing better customer service, while improved morale had led to increased innovation and problem-solving capabilities throughout the organization. Marcus had documented the transformation process carefully, partly for internal planning purposes but also because he had begun speaking at industry conferences about the business case for employee-centric policies. His presentations had gained significant attention, with other executives asking for advice on implementing similar changes at their companies. The key insight, Marcus explained during a keynote address at a major business conference, was realizing that employee compensation isn't just a cost center, it's an investment in your company's most valuable asset. When you treat people as expenses to be minimized, you get exactly what you pay for. The speech had been recorded and widely shared online, making Marcus an unexpected advocate for progressive employment practices. Several business schools had invited him to speak about the transformation of Sterling Industries, and he was working on a book about leadership and corporate responsibility. However, the most meaningful changes had been personal ones for Marcus himself. The experience of truly listening to his employees and understanding their struggles had fundamentally altered his perspective on wealth, success, and leadership responsibility. He had made significant changes to his personal lifestyle, selling his yacht and second home and using the proceeds to establish an employee emergency assistance fund. The fund provided interest-free loans and grants to employees facing unexpected financial hardships, ensuring that temporary setbacks wouldn't force good people to leave the company. Marcus had also restructured his own compensation, reducing his salary and bonus package by 40% and tying his remaining compensation directly to employee satisfaction metrics rather than just financial performance. This had initially surprised and concerned the board of directors, but the positive publicity and improved company performance had validated his decision. The relationship between Marcus and his employees had evolved dramatically. His office was now genuinely open, with employees regularly stopping by to share ideas, concerns, or simply to update him on their projects. He had established weekly lunch sessions with randomly selected employees, maintaining the practice that had proved so valuable during the initial transformation period. During one such lunch, Marcus found himself sitting with 3 employees who had been hired in the months following the compensation reforms. Their enthusiasm and engagement were markedly different from what he remembered seeing in new hires during the previous years. "I turned down 2 other job offers to come here," explained Jennifer, a recent college graduate working in the marketing department. Sterling Industries has this reputation now for actually caring about employee development. "My friends at other companies are always complaining about their workload and feeling undervalued, but I've never experienced that here." These conversations reinforced Marcus's conviction that the changes had created a sustainable competitive advantage for Sterling Industries. The company was attracting better talent, retaining experienced employees, and maintaining higher productivity levels than their competitors. The transformation had also had unexpected effects on innovation and creativity within the company. Employees who felt secure and valued were more willing to take risks, propose new ideas, and collaborate across departments. The number of employee-generated improvement suggestions had increased by over 300%, and many of these ideas had led to significant operational improvements and new product developments. Sarah Martinez had played a crucial role in fostering this innovative environment. Her employee experience initiatives included innovation challenges, cross-departmental project teams, and regular brainstorming sessions that brought together employees from all levels of the organization. When people aren't stressed about paying their bills or worried about job security, they have mental energy available for creative thinking, Sarah explained during a presentation to the executive team. "We've essentially removed the financial stress that was preventing our employees from performing at their best." The success of Sterling Industries' transformation had attracted attention from competitors, leading to an industry-wide examination of employment practices. Several other companies had implemented similar compensation improvements, creating a positive feedback loop that was raising standards across the entire sector. Marcus had also become involved in policy discussions about corporate responsibility and worker rights. He testified before a congressional committee about the business benefits of fair employment practices and had joined several industry groups focused on promoting progressive workplace policies. The bathroom conversation that had started this entire transformation had become something of a legend within Sterling Industries, though most employees didn't know the specific details. Marcus had shared the general story of how he had learned about employee concerns through accidental eavesdropping, but he had never revealed Sarah's identity or the specific content of her conversation. Sarah herself had become a mentor and advocate for other employees, particularly women and young professionals who were navigating their early careers. Her success story, rising from a frustrated project manager to a senior leadership position, had become an inspiration for others who had previously felt stuck in their roles. "The most important thing I learned," Sarah reflected during an interview for the company newsletter, "was that speaking up about problems, even when it feels risky, can sometimes lead to positive change. Obviously, I never expected the CEO to overhear my private conversation, but I'm grateful that it happened." Marcus had maintained a practice of periodic self-evaluation, regularly examining whether the company was living up to the values and commitments that had emerged from the transformation process. He had established external advisory groups, including former employees and industry experts, to provide objective assessment of Sterling Industries' employment practices. The company had also begun publishing annual transparency reports that detailed compensation data, employee satisfaction metrics, and progress on various workplace improvement initiatives. This level of openness was unusual in their industry, but it had contributed to the company's reputation as a leader in progressive employment practices. As Marcus prepared for the quarterly board meeting, he reflected on how dramatically his definition of business success had evolved. 18 months earlier, he had measured the company's performance almost exclusively through financial metrics. Now, he was equally focused on employee satisfaction, workplace culture, and the broader social impact of Sterling Industries' operations. The board meeting itself demonstrated how much had changed. Instead of focusing solely on profit margins and cost control, the discussion included extensive review of employee feedback, retention rates, and long-term sustainability initiatives. Board members who had initially been skeptical of the compensation reforms were now strong supporters of the company's employee-centric approach. "The market has definitely noticed what we're doing here," Board Chairman Robert Chang observed. "Our stock price has increased significantly, partly due to our improved financial performance, but also because investors view us as a well-managed company with strong long-term prospects." The transformation of Sterling Industries had become a case study taught in business schools and referenced in academic research about corporate leadership and employee relations. Marcus regularly received requests from students and researchers who wanted to understand how such comprehensive organizational change had been accomplished. Looking back on the entire experience, Marcus often marveled at how a moment of accidental eavesdropping had led to such fundamental changes in his understanding of leadership and corporate responsibility. The bathroom conversation that had initially embarrassed and angered him had ultimately become the catalyst for the most meaningful work of his career. The company culture that had emerged from this transformation was characterized by mutual respect, open communication, and shared commitment to success. Employees felt genuinely valued and supported, while management had learned to see workforce investment as essential to long-term competitiveness rather than an unnecessary expense. Sterling Industries had become proof that companies could be both financially successful and socially responsible, demonstrating that investing in employees was not just morally correct but also economically smart. The transformation had created a sustainable model that other organizations could follow, contributing to broader discussions about the future of work and corporate responsibility. As Marcus walked through the office that evening, observing employees who were engaged, productive, and genuinely happy in their work, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The success he had achieved through this transformation was different from anything he had experienced before, because it had been built on principles of fairness, respect, and mutual investment rather than simply maximizing profits at any cost. The bathroom incident had taught him that true leadership required the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and the wisdom to transform challenges into opportunities for growth and improvement. Most importantly, it had shown him that the most successful businesses were those that recognized the fundamental humanity of their employees and treated them accordingly. The first signs of success came within a few months of implementation. Employee turnover rates dropped dramatically, with exit interviews showing that compensation concerns were no longer the primary reason people left the company. Recruitment became significantly easier, with qualified candidates showing increased interest in Sterling Industries positions. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus began to see changes in workplace culture and employee engagement. Departments that had previously struggled with low morale began showing increased collaboration and innovation. Productivity metrics improved as employees became more invested in their work and more confident about their future with the company. However, Marcus also learned that compensation improvements alone weren't sufficient to address all of the cultural issues that had developed over the years. Many employees remained skeptical about management's long-term commitment to change, having been disappointed by previous promises that weren't fully implemented. Building trust would require consistent demonstration that the company's new values were genuine and permanent. Marcus realized that this transformation would take years to complete, but the early results suggested that Sterling Industries was moving in the right direction. The bathroom conversation that had started this entire process seemed like a distant memory, but Marcus often reflected on how a moment of accidental eavesdropping had fundamentally changed his understanding of leadership and corporate responsibility. He had learned that success couldn't be measured solely in financial terms, and that sustainable business growth required genuine investment in the people who made that growth possible. And your career goals, Marcus said, trying to keep his tone professional but warm. I've been reviewing performance data across the company, and your work consistently stands out as exceptional. There was a long pause before Sarah responded. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I appreciate the recognition. I understand you've applied for several internal positions recently. I'd like to discuss why those applications weren't successful and what we can do to support your career advancement. Marcus could hear the surprise in Sarah's voice as she talked about her experiences with the promotion process. She described feeling qualified for positions that went to external candidates, and her frustration with the lack of feedback about how to improve her candidacy for future opportunities. I've also been reviewing our compensation structure, Marcus continued carefully. I believe there are significant improvements we need to make to ensure we're properly valuing our employees' contributions. The conversation lasted for over an hour, and, by the end, Marcus had gained valuable insights into how company policies affected individual employees. Sarah's experience was clearly representative of many others, and her suggestions for improvement were thoughtful and practical. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how much his perspective had changed in just 1 week. The overheard bathroom conversation that had initially embarrassed and angered him had become the catalyst for the most important business decision of his career. Tomorrow, he would begin implementing changes that would transform Sterling Industries, but, more importantly, he would begin the process of becoming the kind of leader his employees deserved. Missed before. The company's focus on efficiency and cost control had created a culture where employees felt undervalued and expendable. Managers were afraid to advocate strongly for their teams because they knew budget constraints would likely prevent any meaningful improvements. By the end of the week, Marcus had compiled a comprehensive picture of Sterling Industries from the employee perspective. It was a successful company that generated substantial profits while systematically undercompensating the people responsible for that success. Employees were loyal and hardworking despite receiving little recognition or reward for their efforts. The most painful realization was that this situation had developed gradually over several years, with each cost-cutting measure and budget freeze pushing employees a little further behind. What had seemed like prudent financial management from the executive level had translated into genuine hardship for the workforce. Marcus knew that addressing these issues would require more than just policy changes. It would require a fundamental shift in how the company viewed and treated its employees. The question now was whether he had the courage to make the changes necessary to rebuild the trust and respect he had lost, and whether it was possible to transform Sterling Industries into the kind of company he had once believed it to be. He opened his laptop and began researching salary data for his industry and region. What he found was deeply troubling. While Sterling Industries' salaries were technically competitive, they were at the low end of the range. More importantly, he discovered that the cost of living in their city had increased significantly over the past few years, while his company's salary increases had been minimal. Marcus spent hours that night going through financial data, employee records, and cost of living statistics. The picture that emerged was one of a successful company that had prioritized profits over people. He began to understand that while he had been celebrating record earnings, his employees had been falling behind economically. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had become exactly the kind of CEO he had once criticized, so focused on financial success that he had lost sight of the human cost. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, particularly her observation that he probably thought his employees should be grateful for the opportunity to work for poverty wages. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself making lists and taking notes. He began to formulate a plan, though he wasn't sure yet what form it would take. He knew that simply increasing salaries across the board would be a start, but he sensed that the problems ran deeper than just compensation. There was clearly a disconnect between management and employees that needed to be addressed. The most troubling part of his revelation was the realization that Sarah's perception of him was probably shared by many other employees. He had worked hard to build Sterling Industries, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that the company's success depended on the dedication and hard work of people like Sarah. Instead of being seen as a leader who valued his team, he was viewed as a greedy, out-of-touch executive who cared only about profits. Marcus closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of understanding just how disconnected he had become from his own company. He would find out who Sarah Martinez was and what her story really looked like. More importantly, he would begin the difficult work of figuring out how to rebuild the trust and respect he had apparently lost without even realizing it. The comfortable certainty he had felt about his role as a successful CEO had been shattered by a conversation he was never meant to hear. Now he faced the challenge of confronting the uncomfortable truth about what his success had cost others and deciding what kind of leader he truly wanted to be.